Hey guys, tonight we're trudging down a dusty, ancient road where the air smells like sweat, old leather, and the kind of disappointment only travel without plumbing can bring. You've been walking all day, sunburnt, half-starved, and in desperate need of a drink. But just as your legs threaten mutiny, a flickering torch ahead signals salvation, a roadside inn. Shelter, maybe a stew, and a place to collapse. Sounds cozy, right? Not quite. Because the moment you step inside, you realize you're not the only one who had this idea. The inn is packed with other travelers, merchants with suspiciously full bags, a soldier polishing his sword like it's a warning, a toothless bard tuning a lute that clearly hates him, and someone in the corner coughing into their wine. You suddenly remember this is not a hotel with check-in counters and key cards. This is a survival arena disguised as hospitality. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. It's oddly fun to see who else is listening to ancient filth at 2:00 a.m. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the flickering gloom, and the floorboards wheeze under your weight. The smell hits next smoke-sweat goat, and something vaguely medicinal that suggests someone's bleeding nearby. Welcome to the ancient world's version of a roadside motel, chaotic, loud, half-burning, and filled with people who might rob you or sing at you in the middle of the night, possibly both. The innkeeper squints at you with eyes that have seen too many liars and too few bathers. They nod barely and gesture toward a bench. No paperwork, no ID, just your face and the coin in your hand, assuming you have either. And if not, well, some places accept stories, songs, or that spare hunk of dried meat in your pouch. Others just accept bribes. You sit near the hearth, hoping to warm your numb fingers, and find yourself elbow to elbow with a man who smells like horseshoe polish and coughs like he's inhaled half the road. He's nursing a bruise under one eye and a wooden cup filled with something steaming and terrifying. You offer a polite nod. He responds with a toothy grin that's missing half the teeth. This is normal. Travelers in the ancient world weren't glamorous wanderers with curated Instagram feeds. They were filthy, aching, cranky bundles of human need, and innkeepers had to take them all. Whether you were a wealthy merchant with an entourage or a runaway slave with a convincing lie, you still needed food, warmth, and a place to lie very still. And so the innkeeper, half diplomat, half janitor, part-time spy, had to serve them all, which meant understanding what every shuffled groan or drunken slur meant. They developed an instinct over time. The way someone held their cup, how fast they looked away when asked a question, whether they asked too much or too little. This wasn't just hospitality, it was defense. Because some of the guests weren't just dirty, they were dangerous. Soldiers off duty liked to treat inns like occupied cities. Drunks grew loud, then violent. Traveling performers sometimes forgot to pay. Or worse, paid with a performance. And that's not even mentioning the plaguey ones, the ones who'd collapse mid-sentence and turn your entire common room into a coughing chorus. Historians still argue whether most ancient inns had private rooms or just communal sleeping areas. The truth probably lies in between. In richer towns or Roman mancios, travelers might get curtained cubicles. In most roadside inns, you got a bit of floor, a wall to lean on, and the hope that your neighbor wouldn't steal your boots while you slept, or your identity. Fake names were common. No IDs meant you could call yourself anything. Tiberius the merchant, Lucinda of Delphi Greg. It didn't matter, as long as you had something to offer. And if you didn't, well, inns had cellars. Cellars had locks. And not every disappearance was reported. You watch as a merchant argues with the innkeeper about his mule eating someone's hat. A barmaid ducks a thrown tankard. Someone behind you lets out a belch that may have ended a few lives. You start to wonder, why would anyone choose to run a place like this? Because innkeeping somehow was profitable. Not reliable, but when the season hit, right harvest fairs, religious festivals, military movement, it meant full benches, sold-out stews, and coin pouring into your wooden till. It also meant keeping the peace with a raised eyebrow and occasionally a club behind the counter. The innkeeper brings you a bowl of something steaming. You peer into it. It's brown, possibly meat, possibly not. You don't ask. Asking is rude and pointless. Instead, you eat because it's warm, and because the man with the bruised face is now watching you eat, like he's considering trying a bite. From your hand, a few hours pass. The fire burns lower. People snore, mumble shift. Somewhere, a rat thuds against the wall and scurries away with a bit of bread. The innkeeper yawns, stretches, and begins making the rounds, checking for weapons, under cloaks, making sure the drunk in the corner isn't actually dead, and locking the main door with a bar thick as your arm. And you curl up next to your pack, breathe in the mix of smoke stew and unwashed humanity, and begin to understand innkeepers didn't survive by accident. They survived by watching, guessing, bluffing, and when all else failed, grabbing the nearest chair leg and swinging. Because tomorrow will bring more guests, more stories, more trouble, and possibly more rats. You wake up sore, confused, and halfway tangled in someone else's blanket. It takes a second for your brain to reboot and realize you're not under attack, just sleeping on a stone floor with 10 other people who snore like war drums. A rooster crows somewhere outside. Or maybe it's a very enthusiastic drunk. Either way, it's morning, and morning means breakfast if you're lucky. But luck is scarce in a roadside inn. You stretch, rub your eyes, and join the groggy procession to the hearth, where the innkeeper is already ladling something suspiciously gray into mismatched wooden bowls. Whatever it is, it smells like oats, onions, and compromise. You don't complain. Complaining makes you a target. You see, most people assume innkeeping in the ancient world was about coin, but here's the truth. Coins weren't always useful. Depending on where you were, actual money could be rare, localized, or downright worthless. What innkeepers really valued, what helped them survive, was barter. They were greedy for grain, not gold. Grain kept the stew going. Dried figs made good snacks. A strip of leather could patch a shoe. Stories about local patrols or trade routes, that was currency. In the shadowy economy of the ancient road, gossip was as good as silver, and guests knew it. Travelers would offer dried beans, a hunk of cheese, or a crude drawing of the route ahead in exchange for a meal or a bed. Some would perform tricks, recite poetry, or swear they'd repay next time. Spoiler, they rarely did. The innkeeper had to weigh every offer. A coin might be fake. A fig might be wormy. A traveler might say he's a merchant, but smell like he's been hiding in a pig cart for 3 days. And yet, turning people away had risks. Word got around. And worse, sometimes those guests came back with friends, with torches. Historians still debate whether inns had formal menus or just made whatever stew could be cobbled together from guest donations. The general consensus, the special was usually whatever hadn't rotted yet. You take a bite and immediately wish you hadn't. There's a chewy chunk that might be meat or possibly old rope. Either way, it's warm, and that's what counts. You glance at your bowl and notice something floating that looks distressingly like a claw. The innkeeper shrugs. That means it's edible. Meanwhile, a caravan leader is trying to pay with dyed cloth and a joke about his mother-in-law. The innkeeper doesn't laugh. She takes the cloth, sniffs it, and grunts a polite way of saying, "This had better not be dyed with beetles again." Barter wasn't just about goods. It was about timing and desperation. Show up during festival season, and you could demand a room with your own candle and maybe a door that latches. But arrive during a famine or after a bandit raid, and you might find yourself charged triple for a handful of lentils and a spot near the dung pile. Worse, if a wealthy guest showed up and needed space, you might be accidentally encouraged to leave. Some innkeepers didn't even hide it. They'd offer you a refund, a farewell slap on the back, and point to the road like they were doing you a favor. And, speaking of favors, sometimes survival meant playing a long game. That quiet traveler with the calloused hands and hidden dagger, he might be dangerous, but if you treated him well, he might tip you off about a coming tax sweep or offer protection from worse men. Hospitality was a gamble, and innkeepers were the house. Usually, there's an old tale passed down in a few regions, somewhere between fact and local myth, about an innkeeper who took in a limping traveler during a thunderstorm, fed him, hid him, and never asked questions. A month later, the same traveler returned with a satchel of silver and a whispered warning about a corrupt governor. That inn stayed open for 40 more years. But for every tale like that, There were 3 more about stew poisoned over debt, or rooms set ablaze because a guest flirted with the wrong barmaid. Survival didn't mean kindness. It meant calculated kindness. You watch as a young boy runs through the common room, barefoot, holding a chicken like a trophy. He's probably the innkeeper's son, or possibly just a guest who never left. Another man tries to trade a polished stone for breakfast. The innkeeper sighs, accepts it, and tucks it into a pouch that clinks suspiciously with other useless treasures. This is the rhythm of the place. Not smooth, not civilized, but functional. And remarkably, it works. Even when someone vomits into the corner stew pot, even when the goat escapes and knocks over a bench, even when the firewood runs out and someone has to burn part of the sign, because the innkeeper has learned what to value: warmth over gold, respect over titles, and bread that doesn't fight back. By midday, the inn is clearing out. Merchants gather their donkeys. Drunks are dragged outside by their friends or the innkeeper's apprentice. You nod to the innkeeper as you pack up. She doesn't smile, but she doesn't charge you extra either. That's the closest thing to affection you'll get. You step back onto the road, belly half full, wallet only slightly lighter, and one sock mysteriously damp. As the sun climbs and the dust rises, you realize something odd. You might survive another night like this. Might, because up ahead beyond the bend, there's another inn, another fire, another bowl of questionable stew, and probably another traveler waiting to steal your spoon. You don't realize how loud an inn can be until you try to fall asleep in one. And not the pleasant kind of loud, no crackling fireplace or soft harp music here. It's the kind of loud where someone 2 rooms away is either dying singing or inventing new swear words in a forgotten dialect. Possibly all 3. It starts with voices. Not just any voices, too many voices. A grumbling merchant muttering prayers under his breath. A gambler bragging loudly about a dice game he definitely cheated at. A mother whispers singing her child to sleep next to a man who hasn't stopped hiccuping since sundown. And here's the problem. The walls aren't really walls. Most ancient inns weren't known for soundproofing. What they were known for was thin timber planks, straw partitions, or if you were lucky, hung cloth to separate sleeping areas. If the inn had more than 1 room, it was probably because the barn out back didn't want to share space with the guests anymore. You roll over on your makeshift bed, which is really just a sack of straw that squeaks every time you exhale. On the other side of your wall, a slightly thicker curtain, a couple is arguing about whether a goat is appropriate wedding dowry. The goat is very vocal in its opinion too. You sigh. Welcome to the land of zero privacy. Everything you say, groan, mumble, or dream about is now public record. You sneeze, and someone 2 partitions over blesses you. You try to adjust your belt quietly, and someone else tells you to stop that. You're no longer a traveler. You're part of a low-budget theater production no one asked for. Innkeepers learned quickly how to manage this chaos, or at least how to ignore it. Their job wasn't to provide peace. It was to appear as though peace existed, even as a minor civil war brewed in the corner.
This illusion of calm was maintained through firm glances, noise, tolerance, and when necessary, a mop and bucket at 3 a.m. Historians still argue whether ancient inns were mainly designed for overnight stays or prolonged residence. Some believe they operated more like communal rest stops, while others think they served as long-term shelter for transient workers or wayward pilgrims. What's not debated? No matter how long you stayed, you never forgot what your neighbor smelled like. And oh, the smells. Old sweat, wet wool, garlic breath, rotting sandals. Each one seeps through the walls and settles in like a permanent guest. Some travelers hang herbs by their beds in a desperate attempt to mask it. Others just drink until they can't smell anything. It's an ancient survival tactic, still popular today. Then come the sounds you weren't expecting: whispered, plotting, creaking floorboards, the clink of metal that definitely isn't a coin pouch. There's a universal rule in ancient inns: if someone says, "Shh," you absolutely should not sleep after that. That's when the innkeeper starts making rounds, torch in hand, face stern with sleep debt and suspicion. She stalks the corridor like a ghost with arthritis. Her eyes flick across curtains, ears tuned for trouble. She knows the difference between drunken laughter and a pre-fight warm-up. She's heard love confessions, bribes, and at least one accidental exorcism. You lie perfectly still. The innkeeper passes by your room. She doesn't stop, which means you've passed the test for now. Someone else, however, has not. You hear a curtain yank open, a gasp, a slap, a hurried apology. Then footsteps, fast ones, followed by a dull thud. Either someone just dropped a jug of wine or a traveler just lost consciousness. Either way, the noise settles quickly, very quickly, suspiciously quickly. And still no one gets up. That's the dance of the ancient inn. Hear everything, react to nothing, and hope the gods didn't hear. You hear it. In the morning, some guests will act like nothing happened. Others will be gone before dawn. And if someone's missing, well, the well was acting funny last week. Among the more superstitious travelers, there was a belief that speaking too much at an inn made your dreams come true, but only the bad ones. So, some guests stayed silent, even through pain or nightmares. One Roman diary fragment recounts a man who claimed to sleep with a mouthful of beeswax to keep the spirits out, or maybe just the snoring. You turn on your side, trying to tune it all out. But now you can hear someone practicing a flute badly at midnight. You consider violence. Instead, you count footsteps, the pitter-patter of mice in the rafters, the innkeeper's slow patrol, the unmistakable slap of bare feet from someone who just knows they forgot their knife in the toilet bucket. And then there's laughter, low, conspiratorial, and far too confident. It comes from two guests, huddled in the darkest corner of the common room. They're planning something. You can't hear what. But you know the innkeeper hears it too, because her steps pause for just a second longer. She doesn't interrupt.
Not yet. Maybe she's listening. Maybe she's waiting. Maybe she's remembering what they looked like when they checked in, what they didn't have with them then that they mysteriously have now. You breathe slowly. Sleep drifts toward you like fog over a swamp, uneven, uncertain, and carrying strange noises. You wonder, do the innkeepers ever really sleep? Or do they lie awake counting the strangers they've housed, wondering which one will be trouble by morning? And if you were them, watching the walls, listening to everything, would you know who to trust? You hope so. Because someone just whispered your name. You jolt awake, heart thudding, only to realize it wasn't your name after all. Just someone choking on a snore, or possibly a dream, or maybe a piece of barley crust lodged from last night's soup. Regardless, you're still in one piece. Mostly. But sleep isn't coming back anytime soon, and now you're wide awake in a room that smells like unwashed ambition and burning tallow. You sit up, shift on your crinkly straw mattress, and catch a glimpse of the common room. Again, flickering shadows, curled up bodies, one man who seems to be arguing with a chair. Classic. You get up to stretch your legs, and that's when you see it. The gaming corner, just beyond the hearth, tucked near a barrel with one leg shorter than the others, is a battered table covered in bone stones and what might once have been coins. It's a primitive gambling station, and it's already occupied by 4 men, 1 woman, and a man-sized lump snoring with his face on the table. You've stumbled upon the unsupervised entertainment district of the inn. You wander closer. The dice are carved from bone scratched, uneven, definitely cursed. The players speak in hushed tones, half laughs, and full lies. You see someone slyly mark a pebble with soot. Another player casually adjusts his sleeve to reveal a dagger. And then there's the brawl. It starts not with a shout, but with a grunt, the kind of sound that usually precedes either a fight or a hernia. A man slams his palm on the table. Dice scatter. Another man accuses him of cheating. The woman stands up, flips her chair backward, and reveals she's been sitting on a loaded club this whole time. You instinctively duck. This, too, is normal. Ancient inns were breeding grounds for brawls, and not the poetic kind. We're talking clumsy, table-breaking, eyebrow-splitting mayhem. Over cards, over coins, over who looked at whom during supper. It didn't take much. Just the wrong word in the wrong tone. Or a chicken stolen from the wrong sleeping spot. Historians still debate whether games of chance were officially sanctioned in these establishments or merely tolerated as guest enrichment. What's agreed upon is that gambling and drinking combined into a reliably disastrous combo, one that innkeepers endured only because it kept guests spending, and sometimes those guests spent big. One innkeeper's diary fragment in Pompeii describes a traveler who lost his horse tunic and future wedding rites in a single evening. The next morning, the inn had a new horse, a fresh tunic for the apprentice, and a wedding invitation tacked to the door. Who said romance was dead? But most brawls didn't end in marriage. They ended in bruises, broken stools, and awkward breakfasts. That's where the innkeeper came in armed with a broomstick, a bucket of stale ale, and a voice that could silence thunderstorms. You watch her now as she storms toward the gaming table. No hesitation. She whacks one man's shoulder with the flat of a wooden spoon, yells at another in a dialect only angry grandmothers still speak. The table clears in seconds. Even the sleeping man somehow rolls himself under the bench, instinctively dodging the fallout. The woman with the club grumbles but obeys. She's smart enough to know that fighting the innkeeper is like challenging a volcano. You might win, but everyone else will die too. You find your way back to your corner of straw and marvel at how quickly the chaos resets. The inn breathes, fights, ignite, smolder, and vanish. Guests curse, eat, sleep, and rise again. It's a living organism. A creature with moods, scars, and very little patience for drama that doesn't pay. That's why some innkeepers installed house rules. Not written, of course. Writing was expensive, and most guests couldn't read. But verbal laws passed down like old recipes. Don't steal knives. Don't bleed on the floorboards. Don't flirt with anyone whose sandals look handmade. Those are usually trouble. And above all, don't argue with the innkeeper. It was common in some regions to designate a peace spot, a single bench or stone where anyone could retreat if a fight broke out. The rule, no one could touch them there. It was like a safe square in a deadly game of tag. And if you violated that, the other guests might turn on you, because even in chaos, there's code. Your thoughts are interrupted by someone sitting down beside you. A young man, barely more than a boy, with a black eye and an expression that says, "I make bad decisions." He offers you a piece of dried fruit. You accept. It's either generosity or bait. Time will tell. He whispers about a caravan he tried to rob. It went badly. Now he's on the run. You nod like that's the most natural thing in the world. Because here it is. Everyone in an inn is running from something. Weather, consequences, ex-wives, bandits, taxes. Occasionally, all five at once. The innkeeper passes by again. She doesn't stop. She sees you sitting quietly, no weapons drawn, no dice thrown. You're harmless, for now. That's good. She's tired. You can see it in her gait, in the way she mutters to herself in a language no one else speaks. Probably just curses mixed with tomorrow's shopping list. You lean back against the wall. The inn settles again. A few embers glow. Someone starts snoring with vibrato. And in this moment, in this madness, you realize the innkeeper doesn't just manage chaos. She invites it, like a farmer welcomes rain, like a priest welcomes confession. Because as long as people gamble, brawl, and occasionally sleep, they'll always come back. And when they do, she'll be ready with a bowl of stew, a club under the counter, and the kind of silence that says, "Go ahead, try me." By now you've learned to read the innkeeper's face the way a sailor reads the clouds for signs of approaching disaster. And tonight, as she narrows her eyes at the man who just staggered through the door, you see a storm forming. He's tall, hooded, dripping wet, despite no sign of rain outside. His boots clomp too heavily, and his eyes scan the room like he's expecting to find someone already bleeding. Guests glance up and quickly look away. Even the goat tied near the hearth seems to shrink back. The innkeeper doesn't flinch. She sniffs. And that's when you realize the sniff isn't for effect. It's reconnaissance. Innkeepers, after years of surviving the worst people humanity has to offer, developed a sixth sense, a kind of nose for trouble, not metaphorically, literally. You can smell fear, desperation, and too much cheap wine from across the room if you've done this long enough. And this woman has. She moves toward the stranger, slowly wiping her hands on her apron as she walks. Her posture is relaxed. Her eyes are not. She greets him with a nod, not too friendly, not too cold. Soup's hot, floor's dry. If you want both, you pay first. He hesitates. So does the room, because everyone else is watching now, pretending they're not. A few guests shift. Subtly, hands slide closer to belt knives, tankards pause mid-air. You can feel the change in the air, like static before lightning. Historians still argue whether ancient innkeepers had any formal training in conflict management or were simply hardened by necessity. The truth likely lies in that exhausted stare too many nights dealing with people who brought trouble in their packs and poison in their words. The man finally nods, tossing a coin onto the counter. It's a real one. The innkeeper bites it anyway. She jerks her head toward the fire and turns away, her body relaxed again. Not because she trusts him, but because she's already prepared 3 exits, one warning signal for the apprentice, and knows exactly where the big ladle is if things go sideways. You begin to understand surviving in this job isn't about being strong. It's about knowing who's bluffing, who's hiding something, and who's about to throw a table. Inns saw every kind of guest, pilgrims with lies, diplomats with enemies, spouses pretending not to recognize each other. It was the innkeeper's job to read them before the damage was done. That's why some kept lists, not names, but types. The braggart, the sleeper who talks too much, the dog smuggler, the one who flirts with everyone, the one who stabs everyone. Innkeeping was part psychology, part roulette. You sip your drink, eyes still on the stranger. He hasn't taken off his cloak. His boots are leaving muddy prints, which isn't polite, but it's not dangerous. Yet. The innkeeper's eyes flick to him every time she moves. She refills bowls, nudges a candle back upright, shoos the goat out of the ashes. But her gaze keeps circling. You've seen this before. She's waiting for a sign. And then it comes. The man leans forward, whispering something to a nearby guest. Too fast, too quiet. And the guest, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, goes still. The innkeeper doesn't say anything. She simply sets down her ladle and walks into the back room, calmly. 5 heartbeats later, she returns with a small burlap pouch and a heavier footstep. That's when you realize she's put on her boots and tied her apron tighter. She's expecting blood. You glance around. Other regulars have noticed too. The room shifts more space between benches, a quieter hum of voices. This is a practiced response. They've seen it happen. They know how to get out of the way. Innkeepers learn to make decisions fast. Pause too long, and someone gets stabbed. Act too fast, and you scare off the guest who was just trying to sell fish oil. But the real skill, knowing when to step back and let the room do the work. And tonight it does. The scarred man suddenly stands up slowly, deliberately, and dumps his soup on the floor. Too salty, he growls, not looking at the cloaked guest. The cloaked guest doesn't move. Then he does. A hand dips under the table, a flick of steel. You can't tell what happened next, only that chairs scrape. Someone curses, and the cloaked man is suddenly outside, shoved, kicked, or scared out. Doesn't matter. He's gone. And the innkeeper, she's still holding that burlap pouch, untouched. She nods at the scarred man. No words, just mutual understanding. He sits back down and resumes drinking. The puddle of soup is ignored. It'll dry. You finally exhale and realize this is how innkeepers survived, not by fighting every battle, but by knowing when the battle would start and making sure it ended quickly. There are whispered stories about innkeepers who carried daggers in their hair, poison under their nails, and names in their heads that could get guests arrested or protected, depending on who asked. Most of these stories are exaggerations. Most. The innkeeper passes you by and meets your eyes for half a second. You nod. It's not thanks, it's respect. She saw it all, handled it, and went back to stirring soup like it was just another Tuesday. You lie back down, heart slowing, the room returning to its restless murmur. And you wonder how many lives has she saved by not swinging first. You drift off, thinking of her eyes, sharp, unreadable, and always watching. The smell hits you before you open your eyes. Something sizzling fat, maybe onions, maybe regret. Your stomach rumbles. You sit up, blinking in the dim morning light as it leaks through a greasy window. And that's when you hear the scrape of a knife, the hiss of something dropped into a hot pan, and a man loudly asking if the stew has less bone in it today. Welcome to the kitchen. Not the kind of kitchen where someone gently seasons a roast while singing a lullaby. No, this is the survival-grade cookhouse of an ancient inn, half pantry, half battlefield. Everything is either on fire, fermenting, or about to escape. And in the middle of it all, the innkeeper armed with a spoon and nerves forged in goat stew hell. You edge closer and peer past the curtain. A single cauldron bubbles over a wide hearth. The fire beneath it snarls like it's angry about something. Possibly the contents, possibly the workload, possibly the rat that just scurried by with what looked like a carrot. Cooking for travelers wasn't glamorous. It was warfare against mold, against theft, against stomachs that growled louder than they should. You had to cook fast, make it stretch, and most importantly, not die from what you made. And yet, somehow this woman manages to pull it off. She ladles something into a bowl. The liquid's grayish. There's a floating chunk you don't recognize. The guest takes one sniff, winces, and eats it anyway. He's either desperate or brave, or both. You're not sure which is more dangerous. Here's the secret no one tells you about inn food. It's not supposed to taste good. It's supposed to keep you alive. If it fills your belly and doesn't knock you flat by sundown, it's a win. Historians still debate what typical inn menus looked like. Some suggest stews based on lentils and root vegetables were common. Others argue that meat, when available, was heavily salted, boiled, or mystery adjacent. What's agreed upon? Everything went into one pot, often left bubbling for days. It was less a meal and more a culinary event that never ended. But cooking wasn't just for hungry travelers. It was also a political tool. Because when you're feeding criminals, soldiers, ex-lovers, and spies, all in the same room, the way you feed them matters. The bandit in the corner. He gets a bigger bowl, not because he deserves it, but because you want him sleepy and too full to cause trouble. The priest, he gets the cleaner spoon, clean-ish at least. The group of pilgrims asking too many questions. You serve them last with a smile so thin it could slice bread. Food was negotiation, and sometimes it was defense. You've heard the rumors. The inn near the southern pass that once poisoned a tax collector with a bad batch of wine. The cook who slipped laxatives into the stew before a traveling warlord's visit, stalling his campaign by a full day. The nobleman who tried to threaten an innkeeper's daughter, only to find his meat full of thorns. Accidents happen, especially in kitchens with no lighting, no measuring, and no health department. You watch as the innkeeper adds something to the pot, something dark and leafy. The apprentice next to her leans in and asks what it is. She doesn't answer, just stirs. You get the feeling that even she doesn't know what it is anymore, but it adds flavor. Probably. A guest walks in, a man in dusty sandals, carrying a satchel that smells like fish and ambition. He leans over the counter and grins. Something special today. The innkeeper doesn't look up, same as yesterday. He laughs. You remember me? Now she looks up. You owe me 2 eggs and a bronze ring. He wilts, pays, and sits down quietly. This is how innkeepers keep score. Not just coins, debts, remembered faces, unpaid favors. The man she just served might get a smaller portion next time, or the bitter end of the pot. Not out of cruelty, just fairness. Her fairness. And that fairness is terrifying. She doesn't need guards. She doesn't need chains. She has your history in her head and your breakfast in her hands. That's enough. She turns to the back wall where sacks of grain are lined up like sleepy soldiers. You notice some are labeled. Not in writing, no time for that, but with tied strings, colored stones, a nail here or there. A private code only she and the gods understand. You wonder how many people she's cooked for over the years, how many names she forgot, how many she chose to forget. Because let's be honest, not everyone who walked through that door deserved a hot meal. And yet she feeds them, not out of kindness, but out of necessity, because feeding the enemy today means you might have a roof tomorrow, or a warning, or if you're lucky, a favor returned when it matters most. She turns ladle in hand and gestures toward you. You accept the bowl. Inside broth, a few peas, and a hunk of something that might be mushroom, might be meat. You don't ask. You eat. It's hot. It's salty. It tastes like the kind of safety that only lasts an hour, but that's enough. The innkeeper nods and returns to her cauldron, already moving on to the next fire, the next lay, the next hunger. And you, warm for the moment, begin to understand the quiet power of feeding strangers who might kill you or save you by sunset. You're halfway through your bowl of probably fine stew when a sound interrupts the morning rhythm, the unmistakable slosh of a bucket and the long-suffering sigh of someone about to do something unpleasant. You turn just in time to see the apprentice, face grim, marching past with a mop, a bucket of murky water, and a flat board that might once have been part of a chair. It's bathroom time, or rather, its lack of bathroom time, because ancient inns didn't have bathrooms. Not really. At best, there was a latrine pit out back, shared, stinking and perpetually full of regrets. At worst, there was just a designated corner and a strong communal understanding that outside means outside. Privacy was optional. Dignity, laughable. And someone always had to clean it. Today it's the apprentice. You watch him march past the sleeping guests like a soldier going to war. He's clutching a cloth to his face. You admire his courage. Also, his stupidity. He should have asked for double bread rations in advance. The ancient innkeeper's day didn't start with baking bread or lighting lamps. It started with waste management. You can't run a full inn if everyone's slipping on what someone else left behind. And the worst part, it wasn't just human messes. Guests brought animals, chickens, goats, sometimes pigs. And animals didn't know about etiquette. They just dropped their opinions wherever they pleased. So did some travelers, frankly. Especially the drunk ones, or the sick ones, or worst of all, the ones who refused to admit they were either. There's an entire category of guest in the innkeeper's mind labeled silent leakers, people who deny everything but leave behind a damp straw mattress and a smell that lingers long after their name is forgotten. Historians still argue whether ancient inns had chamber pots. They certainly existed, but whether they were used properly is another matter. Some guests hurled them out windows. Others used them as stools. One Roman letter even complains of a man who used a cooking pot by mistake. Allegedly. The apprentice returns, face pale arms, limp. You offer him a sympathetic look. He doesn't respond. His soul has left his body. He is now a broom with legs. The innkeeper nods approvingly, not kindly, just efficiently, because sanitation wasn't just about cleanliness, it was about survival. One bad waste pile too close to the well, and the entire inn could go from profitable to plague museum in a week. Water had to be fetched, carried, stored, and kept away from the smells. It was a delicate ballet of buckets, lids, and increasingly bitter reminders to guests. That barrel is for drinking, not soaking your feet. You head outside for fresh air and find the back of the inn just as busy. There's a lean-to covered in straw, half for livestock, half for guests who lost their bedding privileges. A crude trench runs nearby, hopefully leading somewhere that isn't uphill. A man is squatting near the hedge with the defeated look of someone who knows better but doesn't care. A woman is rinsing a bowl at the same stream the livestock are drinking from. You try not to think about it, and somewhere near the wall, a cat is digging a hole with more finesse than half the guests. Back inside, the innkeeper is inspecting the corners. She has a stick, not for punishment, though it could be, but for poking, under benches, behind barrels, near the hearth. She's checking for things, unmentionables, forgotten things, leaking things. Every inn had its hazards: lice, fleas, rats, spilled ale, the occasional severed chicken foot. Cleanup wasn't optional. It was the only thing standing between respectable establishment, and no one goes there anymore because they found something twitching in the mattress. You remember the tale of the inn near the marsh that was shut down after guests started vomiting up worms. Turned out the latrine pit had flooded and seeped into the pantry floorboards. The innkeeper claimed innocence, blamed the worms on the flour. It didn't help. Sanitation mistakes could cost you your license, or your customers, or your soul. The innkeeper's greatest weapon wasn't her ladle or her stare, it was prevention. She knew who was sick before the symptoms showed. She rotated bedding like a general shuffling troops. She burned herbs, not for charm but for stench. You look up and notice bunches of dried sage thyme and lavender tied to the rafters. They're not for flavor. They're for smell, for masking, for pretending. Pretending this place doesn't smell like an armpit in a fish market. A guest approaches the hearth with a sour look. "There's something in my blanket," he announces. The innkeeper doesn't pause her stirring. "Kill it, then fold the blanket." He hesitates. What if it's alive? Now she looks up. It won't be long. That's the policy. Don't ask. Just squash. You retreat to your bench, sip your drink, and reflect. Modern travel has its complaints: delays, bad coffee, stiff pillows. But you've never had to share a bucket with a goat and a man who thinks fleas are lucky. Ancient inns weren't glamorous. They were barely safe. But they functioned just enough to keep the world moving. Because when your guests are vomiting, fighting, bleeding, or worse, you don't need fine china. You need someone with a mop, a strong stomach, and no fear of anything that squeaks. And the innkeeper, she's got all three. You hear it before you see it, a low, throaty bray followed by a solid thud, the kind of thud that says something wooden just gave up on life. You step outside and confirm your suspicion. The stable gate has been kicked clean off, and standing proudly over the wreckage is a mule, a very smug mule. A mule who is chewing on the corner of a broom like it's making a point. The merchant who owns it is currently flat on his back, hands in the air, speaking to the heavens in at least 3 languages, none of them flattering. Welcome to another quiet morning at the inn. People always talk about the problems guests cause: arguments, theft, throwing up in places no one should throw up. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes the real menace is 4-legged, cloven-hoofed, and has strong opinions about fences, horses, mules, goats, occasionally a donkey with anger issues. They travel with the guests, eat more than the guests, and crucially wreck more property than the guests. And guess who deals with it? That's right, the innkeeper. You watch her march toward the stable, hair tied back, eyes squinting like she's about to wrestle a god. She doesn't yell. She just walks straight up to the mule, takes its ear in one hand and talks to it, not in a soothing way, more like a warning, disguised as affection. You've got one job, she mutters. Stay tied. Don't kick. Don't eat my buckets. The mule chews its broom defiantly. She yanks the broom out, pats its nose too hard to be kind, and turns to the merchant. You owe me a new gate, she says. He starts to argue. She points to the broken fence, then to the mule, then without breaking eye contact, picks up a pitchfork. He nods. Yes, of course, right away. Because if you think innkeepers are tough on humans, you haven't seen them with animals. Historians still argue whether animals were formerly stabled at inns or just tied up wherever space allowed. The truth probably lies somewhere in between: a corner for beasts, a few posts for tying, and a set of rules scrawled in memory and enforced with sticks. Animals were vital to travel carrying goods, pulling carts, offering milk or meat. But they were also chaotic forces of nature, particularly when kept too close to ale and loud music. Horses kicked through walls. Goats ate laundry. One source from the Near East even describes a camel that set a hay pile on fire by rubbing against a lantern. The innkeeper returns inside, muttering about last week's goose stampede and the duck who thought it was a dog. You follow curious now. Back in the main room, the aftermath of hoofed chaos is visible everywhere. Scratches on the floorboards, a missing seat plank, and one very concerned chicken perched on the rafters. You sit back down with your drink and think, she didn't even flinch. Because this happens every day. Part of innkeeping wasn't just managing rooms. It was managing the small ecosystem that arrived with each guest. Bedding for the people, stalls for the animals, food for both. And that's if you were lucky and someone didn't try to sneak a pig into the sleeping quarters, because it gets lonely outside. Some inns even charged more for guests with animals. Not for the animals themselves, mind you, just for the damage deposit, a concept older than coin itself. And yet, animals could also be assets. The dog that barked at new arrivals, early warning system. The cat that kept the rats away from the pantry, sacred. The rooster that woke everyone up before dawn, whether they liked it or not. Alarm clock with feathers, but you had to manage them. Feed them, pen them occasionally, apologize to them after stepping on their tails in the dark. You glance toward the back, where the innkeeper is now retying a tether with one hand and bottle feeding a lamb with the other. It's like watching a blacksmith juggle torches, graceful, tired, and one mistake away from flaming wool. Another guest stumbles in cloaked, red-faced, clearly hungover, and immediately trips over a dog asleep under the bench. The dog grunts, gets up, and calmly pees on the guest's boot. No one says anything. This is just part of the experience, and maybe that's the most surprising thing. Everyone accepts it. Guests complain about the stew, the beds, the prices. But when a goat eats someone's map, or a horse uses the water barrel as a footbath, the most anyone does is sigh. Because animals, at least, are honest. They don't lie about their names. They don't steal your shoes while you sleep. They don't fake injuries to get out of paying. They just chew, stomp, kick, and occasionally trample your dinner. Simple, predictable, unforgiving, just like the road itself. The innkeeper finally sits down. Not for long, just enough to gulp water and scowl at the dent in her floor. She sighs, then gets back up. There's straw to sweep buckets to refill, and another wagon arriving in the distance. You watch her go, and realize the truth. She's not just surviving this chaos. She commands it. And tomorrow, when another merchant's goat eats the fence again, she'll still be here, with a rope in one hand and a very long list of animal names she's sworn vengeance against. You know something's off the moment the traveler walks in and smiles too wide. Not the tired, grateful kind of smile you give when you've finally reached shelter. No, this one is polished, practiced. The kind of smile that says, I've told this story before and I'm about to sell it again. The innkeeper doesn't blink. The traveler drops his pack with theatrical flair, claps his hands together, and announces, Good evening, fine friends. I've just returned from Damascus with silk spices and tales of the open road. You glance at his boots. No dust, no wear. His cloak still smells faintly of perfume. The innkeeper leans against the counter. Name, Alaric the merchant, he beams. She stares at him. He shifts slightly. Of Gaul, still staring. You can feel the tension build, like a string being pulled tighter with every heartbeat. Around the room, guests glance up from bowls and dice and half-finished naps. Nobody trusts a traveler with perfect shoes, because in ancient inns, names were lies. Every guest had a story, and most of those stories had plot holes. The road didn't just attract traders and pilgrims. It attracted thieves, deserters, escaped lovers, false prophets, and more than a few unpaid actors pretending to be nobility. Innkeepers, of course, had seen them all. Some even kept ledgers, not financial ones, but mental notebooks filled with types. Not names, never names, just behaviors. The man who always compliments your stew before asking for credit. The woman who flirts with the stable hand and then disappears with a mule. The old soldier who's definitely not old and definitely not a soldier. Historians still argue whether inns kept official guest lists, but most agree any written records were more about taxes and permits than accuracy. No one was checking IDs. Your identity was as real as your accent and your ability to keep a straight face when questioned, which is why the innkeeper finally speaks. "What's your mule's name?" The traveler blinks. I don't travel with livestock." She nods slow. "You came from Damascus." "On foot," he swallows. "Just the last stretch." "From where?" Corinth." She raises an eyebrow. "That's the opposite direction." Silence. And in that silence the room resets itself. Benches creak as guests lean back. The dice game resumes. Someone gently moves their drink away from the potential splash zone. Because this too is normal. Travelers lied constantly. It wasn't even personal. It was survival. Fake names could save you from a bounty hunter, or a jealous husband, or on occasion from the law. And sometimes the lie worked if you played it well. You think of the man from last week who claimed to be a spice merchant from Carthage. He was clearly a grave digger, still smelling faintly of formaldehyde and sadness. But he paid in full, didn't stab anyone, and only wept quietly into his lentils. Acceptable. The innkeeper sighs and gestures toward the fire. No trouble. No tabs. Sleep near the hearth. The traveler nods and scurries away, already sweating through his story. He'll probably vanish before dawn. Leave a note, maybe, or just blend into the crowd when the merchant wagons pull out. The innkeeper scratches something into the wall behind the counter. Not a name. Just a mark. One more ghost passing through. You think about how many of them must exist, walking fables people, with more aliases than belongings. Some probably don't even remember their original names, just whichever one got them the last bowl of soup. And occasionally, those lies work too well. There's an old innkeeper's tale about a man who claimed to be a prince so convincingly, so charmingly, that local officials came to visit him. He managed to get 3 days of royal treatment before anyone noticed he couldn't read. When caught, he simply laughed, tipped the cook, and walked away whistling. No one stopped him. No one knew who he really was. Some say he still wanders, changing titles, the way others change cloaks. The point, in the inn, truth is optional, but patterns, those are gospel. You hear a commotion outside, someone arguing over a missing bundle. A woman storms in accusing a guest of stealing her sandals. The accused claims he found them just lying there. The sandals don't match his feet. The innkeeper doesn't flinch. She's seen this before. She pulls a cord from behind the counter. A bell rings somewhere upstairs, and within moments the apprentice appears, holding a basket of found items. A compromise is reached. A different pair of sandals is issued. No one's happy, but no one bleeds. And that's the art of running an inn, not uncovering every lie, but knowing which lies are safe to ignore. The guest who says he's a retired gladiator, let him brag. The woman claiming she's a healer from Alexandria, let her have the cleaner spoon. The boy who says he's just passing through, but keeps glancing at the door every 5 seconds, probably best to assign him the bed nearest the exit. You lie back watching the fire flicker. Everyone here is pretending, even you, and yet you all share the same soup, sleep under the same roof, suffer the same fleas, because no matter what name you wear, the innkeeper sees through it. And if she doesn't stop you, that doesn't mean she believes you. It just means she's watching. The fire has burned low again, crackling softly as the last few guests drift off. But you can't sleep. There's something about the silence, too still, too careful, like the walls are listening. And then it hits you. Someone hasn't moved all evening. You glance over at the far corner of the common room, where a bulky figure has been slumped against the wall since just after sundown. At first you thought he was just drunk, or passed out, or asleep with his eyes half open in that deeply unsettling way some men seem to prefer. But now you're not so sure. You stand stretched casually and wander closer, pretending to examine a loose nail in the wall, or perhaps admire the pattern of soot on the ceiling. Just a traveler strolling with zero curiosity. The man hasn't budged. You glance at the innkeeper. She's polishing a ladle absently, eyes darting over the room like a hawk, pretending not to notice the field mice. You meet her gaze and nod slightly toward the corner. She doesn't blink, just sets the ladle down and wipes her hands on her apron. Uh-oh. There's something innkeepers hate more than drunken guests, more than thieves, more than tax collectors who eat all the bread and tip in prayers. And that's dead bodies, because a dead guest means questions. Questions mean officials. Officials mean paperwork, and ancient paperwork was written on scrolls longer than most marriages. She crosses the room silently, apprentice trailing behind her, holding a wooden board like a weapon. You've seen this dance before. It's the ritual of the check for breath test. She leans in. No reaction. She pokes. Nothing. Then comes the whisper. Not a gentle question, but an ancient innkeeper incantation. If you're alive, grunt. Still silence. She sighs, stands, and utters a phrase that strikes fear into every half-drunk guest lying too still. Someone fetch the shovel. Immediately, 3 people sit upright. I'm not dead, one of them insists. Not you, she says without turning, but thank you for the update. Historians still debate how frequently innkeepers had to deal with guests dying in-house. Death on the road was common fevers, wounds, bad fish, worse decisions. and many chose inns as their final rest, not intentionally, but because it's where the journey stopped. Sometimes they came in sick and never got up. Other times, they were helped along. You watch as the innkeeper kneels next to the body. She puts a finger under the man's nose, waits, then curses under her breath. "He's alive," she mutters. "Just an idiot." The apprentice grins. "Should I still get the shovel? No. Get the bucket." Which is somehow worse, because now comes phase 2 of innkeeping, dealing with guests who refuse to leave. Dead ones are tragic, dangerous, inconvenient. But the living dead, the ones who occupy space, snore like drums, and consume resources without ever contributing. They're a plague in human form. This man has been at the inn for 3 days, apparently. No payment, no luggage, no story. Just a blank stare and a growing pile of lentil debt. Every innkeeper knew this type, the never-leaver. They weren't guests. They were barnacles. And getting rid of them required tact, or force, or both. You watch as the apprentice unceremoniously douses the man with half a bucket of cold water. He gasps, flails, gurgles something that might be a curse or a thank you. The innkeeper points toward the door. "Sun's up in an hour. You won't be here when it is, but you've had more meals than words. But you snored so hard you cracked the wall." But she raises the ladle. He leaves. The room exhales. And this is how it's done, because some guests never leave, literally. And innkeepers had to be part mother, part landlord, part ghostbuster. There's a story told in a coastal town about an innkeeper who found a skeleton under the floorboards. Not from ancient times, just a man who'd died quietly in a crawl space during a festival. No one noticed for days. He was found when someone complained about the smell, and the cats refused to go near the hearth. Since then, every new innkeeper in that region knocks on every wall once a month. And then there were the haunted guests people, so quiet, so still. You began to wonder if they were waiting for something, or someone, or perhaps nothing at all. One guest in the Northern Territories reportedly sat at the same table every night for 10 years, never ordering anything, just watching. No one ever asked why. Sometimes it's safer that way. You look back at the now empty corner. The innkeeper is scrubbing the spot where the man had been with the same determination one might use to remove a blood stain or a curse. She glances at you. Next time she says, "Poke him first." "Noted," you reply. You return to your straw pallet and pull the scratchy blanket around your shoulders. The fire's nothing more than embers now. Most of the guests have shifted into sleep sighs and soft murmurs, but you're awake. Because now you're thinking about all the people who didn't wake up, the ones who never left, the ones whose names were never real, whose stories ended in a corner of an inn between a broken bench and a cold stew pot. And you think maybe it's not the thieves or the bandits or even the goats that are hardest to survive. Maybe it's the quiet ones, the ones no one notices until it's too late. It's festival week. You wouldn't know it by looking at the innkeeper. She's stirring the stew with the same grim determination as usual. But outside, the street is pulsing with color and chaos. Tambourines, flutes, livestock dressed in ribbons, and children with way too much energy for this early in the day. It's loud. It's smelly. It's profitable. And also absolutely horrifying. Because festivals don't just bring joy. They bring crowds. And crowds bring taxes, fights, drunk pilgrims, crying children, unclaimed chickens, and at least one man who insists on blessing every corner of your floor with fermented barley. And inside, the inn is filling faster than a wine cup at a wedding. Merchants, minstrels, monks, beggars, noblewomen in disguise, soldiers off duty. They all want beds, bread, and beer. They want stories and silence, privacy, and entertainment all at once. And somehow, they want it for free. The innkeeper's eye twitches. She's been through this before. She knows that festivals are not a time for celebration. They're a time for triage. You watch her orchestrate the inn like a battlefield commander. Beds are reassigned. Floor space is remeasured with chalk and curses. Benches are bolted down to prevent weaponized flipping. And the stew, it's been stretched so thin it might legally qualify as soup air. Every festival, the same questions come up. Where's my room? You call this stew. Who stole my sandals? Is that goat supposed to be inside? And every time the innkeeper answers, with either a barked command or a subtle threat involving a mop and public humiliation. Historians still argue whether ancient inns prepared specially for festival crowds or just survived them like natural disasters. Based on what you're seeing, it's probably both. There's no planning that fully accounts for the appearance of a group of jugglers who refuse to juggle outside, or the man dressed as a cabbage. And that's not even counting the bribes, because during festivals, everyone wants something extra, a better bed, a closer seat to the hearth, the clean spoon. One woman offers to sing a song in exchange for half a bowl of porridge. The innkeeper lets her. She sings 3 lines and bursts into tears. Everyone applauds politely. She's given porridge and a seat. You're not sure if this was a scam or just sadness with rhythm. Meanwhile, a monk is insisting the inn provides silence after sundown. A bard is insisting the inn provide a performance space for his lute that screams with the voice of heaven. A man in the corner is screaming, but not musically, more medically. The apprentice ducks a flying mug. The goat from 2 nights ago is back wearing bells. Someone tries to dance on a bench and brings down the curtain rod. The innkeeper doesn't flinch. She simply removes a hidden bottle of something very strong from under the counter, takes a sip, and mutters something about last year's flaming cart incident. And then the tax collector arrives, because of course he does. Tall, thin, and wearing the kind of smile that says, I'm here to take your money, your patience, and, possibly, your doorway measurements. He makes a show of inspecting everything, counting beds, sniffing bread, tapping his pen against the ledger like he knows how to write. The innkeeper greets him with what might generously be called courtesy. He demands a list of all current guests. She hands him a piece of parchment. Blank. He frowns. She shrugs. They come. They eat. They leave. Names are optional. He threatens a fine. She threatens to serve him the stew marked Thursday. A compromise is reached. He leaves. Quickly. And this is why Festival Week doesn't mean profit. It means survival math. Yes, more guests, but also more damage, more demands, and more mysterious stains. For every extra coin in the till, there's a ceiling tile missing, or a barmaid crying because someone mistook her for a saint. The innkeeper steps outside for one breath of air and comes back in dragging a man who's fallen asleep on the doorstep. He has no shoes. She doesn't ask questions, just drops him by the hearth and throws a blanket on him, with the efficiency of someone tucking in a log. You look around. The floor is full. The benches are full. Someone is asleep on the bar. Someone else is asleep under the bar. You don't know where your bag is anymore. You don't even care. And tomorrow it'll be worse. Because tomorrow is the festival's climax, the parade of donkeys, the fire procession, the public soapbox, where 3 priests argue about the moon while someone juggles knives nearby. And guess where everyone will return after it ends? Right here. To this inn, to this fire, to this stew that's now mostly water, wishful thinking, and maybe a lentil, if you're lucky. The innkeeper sits down for the first time all day. She's holding a spoon and a ledger with no ink in it. Her eyes are half closed, her lips moving silently. Possibly a prayer, possibly a curse. You raise your cup to her. She doesn't raise hers back, but she doesn't throw it at you either. That's victory. Night falls like a dropped curtain, fast, heavy, and full of mistakes waiting to happen. The last stragglers stumble in just as the door is bolted shut, and with them comes that unique blend of sweat, alcohol, wet wool, and poor decisions. It's time for the most dreaded shift in innkeeping, the night watch. By now the hearth has dimmed to embers. The floor is a patchwork of sleeping limbs, overturned mugs, and someone's forgotten loot. The goat has finally settled. The drunk monk has not. The innkeeper moves through the room with a staff in one hand and a look that says she's ready to swing it at the first snore that sounds like a threat. You lie awake, watching, because sleep here is optional. Safety is negotiable. The innkeeper does her rounds slowly, deliberately. She checks each door if the inn is fancy enough to have them. Where there are only curtains, she uses her eyes. Where there are neither, she simply listens. She's not listening for silence. She's listening for change, a breath held too long, a floorboard that creaks when no one's walking, the scrape of a knife unsheathed under a blanket. Historians still argue whether innkeepers actively carried weapons or simply kept blunt tools nearby. You're fairly certain the heavy ladle she's never far from could put someone into next week if swung correctly. The apprentice once whispered it was nicknamed the silencer. No one's ever asked twice. She reaches under the bar and pulls out a flask. Not for drinking, at least not for pleasure. One gulp, a sharp hiss. Then she tucks it away again and heads toward the stairwell, where the private rooms, if any, are. You hear her knock softly, once, then twice, faster. It's a code, a warning, don't make me come in, because sometimes the trouble comes not from strangers, but from guests who think the night erases consequences. You hear a voice behind a door, then a second one, louder, sharper. The innkeeper doesn't hesitate. She knocks harder this time, and when no one answers, she opens it. No hesitation, no apologies. A crash, a muffled curse, and then silence. Moments later, she emerges holding a small bundle, a dagger, a pouch, and what might be a wig. She locks the door behind her and slides the key into a pouch that's already bulging with secrets. This is the night rhythm step. Listen, confiscate, record nothing. You roll over, just enough to see the hearth. Someone's awake, an older man sitting near the dying fire, whispering to himself. He's not dangerous, just one of those guests who can't sleep unless he's counted every regret twice. The innkeeper passes him, nods, no words. She knows him. She's probably seen him arrive like this for years. Same time, same sad eyes, same need to sit by the fire and say nothing useful until dawn. And then, just as you're starting to drift, comes the sound. A crash, followed by running. You shoot up. The apprentice is already moving barefoot, but armed with a broom. The innkeeper moves faster. She's out the side door in seconds. You hear shouts, scuffling, a shout that turns into a whimper, and then quiet. She returns, holding a thief by the scruff of his cloak. He's young, too young, mud on his knees, panic in his eyes. He holds out the small coin purse he tried to lift and stammers something about hunger. The room watches. The innkeeper stares him down and then lets him go. No lecture, no mercy either, just a nod at the door. He runs. She turns back inside, muttering, "Stupid kids steal from guests. Smart ones offer to clean the privy." You get the feeling she would have hired him if he'd asked, because nighttime was test time. Anyone could run a cheerful inn at midday with music and stew. But after sunset, when the wine had soaked into the floorboards and secrets started breathing louder than people, that's when the real job began. You think of the inns that didn't make it. The ones burned down because someone snuck in a lover and out a dagger. The ones abandoned after 3 bad harvests and 1 unfortunate demon rumor. The ones where the innkeeper fell asleep just once, and woke up tied to a cart with a missing roof. You wonder how this one survives. And then you remember it's her. It's the way she listens, The way she walks like she's always measuring something, threats exits people. It's the way she holds a cup like it might become a weapon, and stirs stew like she's casting a spell. The fire is nearly out. The last guest has rolled over. The goat snores. The innkeeper stands by the door watching, not resting, just watching, because dawn is still hours away, and anything can happen between now and then. By the time the first streak of pale light sneaks in through the shutters, half the room is coughing. You open your eyes to a symphony of wheezes, sniffles, and throat clearings that sound like the inn has been possessed by a chorus of phlegmy ghosts. Someone hawks into a cup. Someone else sneezes into a blanket that is definitely communal. You pull your cloak tighter. Welcome to Inn Plague season. It's not an official holiday, but it comes around like clockwork. A chill in the air, a few coughs too close together, and suddenly half your guests are incubators for something ancient airborne and absolutely not refundable. The innkeeper is already up, of course. She's sniffing herbs, muttering about last year's boil rash, and laying out bundles of dried whatever on the hearthstones like some kind of crusty apothecary. You watch her crush something between her fingers and throw it into a simmering pot. The smell is sharp, earthy, and not entirely comforting. Someone sneezes in your direction. You briefly consider drawing your knife. Ancient inns were incubators for every disease imaginable. Cold fever, stomach rot, goat pox, and things with no names and too many symptoms. Guests didn't wash. They shared cups. They coughed freely. They bathed. Well, they didn't. And in a single poorly ventilated room full of people, snoring, sweating, and occasionally bleeding, illness spread faster than gossip. Historians still debate whether ancient innkeepers understood contagion. Some clearly did. Others relied on rituals, incense, or covering everything in vinegar. One inn in central Italy reportedly kept a live hedgehog in the sleeping quarters to scare away the bad humors. It didn't work. The hedgehog left. The innkeeper, today though, she knows better. She keeps sick guests near the door. She separates the ones who look glassy-eyed and poetic, a common plague symptom. She quietly swaps drinking vessels and burns anything suspicious. You see her slip something into a guest's mug, a few herbs, a drop of oil. The guest drinks it gratefully. Whether it helps or not is beside the point. It shows that someone is paying attention. That's the real trick to surviving sick seasons. Not medicine, not prayers, just vigilance and fast hands. You glance around. One man is sweating profusely and trying to act normal. A child is crying because his bones feel loud. A merchant is definitely faking a cough for sympathy. He'll try to get a discount by midday. He'll fail. Then you hear it. The thud of someone collapsing. You stand instinctively, as does the apprentice. The innkeeper is already moving, pushing through bodies like a storm in an apron. A guest is slumped on the bench barefoot, pale eyes open, but unseeing. Dead now. She checks. Just fainted. Heat, hunger, or too many mushrooms in last night's stew. She throws water in his face. He sputters, coughs, and immediately throws up into his own lap. She nods. Better out than in. Someone offers him bread. Someone else offers him the rest of their drink. And this is how illness is managed here, not by isolation, but by ritual. You get sick. You get stared at. You get soup, if you're lucky. And if you're not dead by tomorrow, you get sent outside to cough in the wind. The innkeeper has rules, though. Clear ones. If you can't walk, you don't stay. If you bleed too much, you go to the barn. If you smell like you're already dead, you absolutely go to the barn. And if you infect someone important, well, then it becomes your problem. You remember the story of the innkeeper who once locked a sneezing noblewoman in the pantry for 2 days. When the magistrate arrived to complain, she served him tea in a cup the noble had used. He stopped complaining. She didn't get any more noble guests, but she also didn't get sick. Back near the fire, a guest tries to argue he's not that ill. He's covered in hives and twitching. The innkeeper raises one eyebrow. He lies back down.
That's how it works here. No one calls it quarantine. No one calls it medicine. But everyone understands the code. You sneeze into your cloak, and immediately 5 guests lean slightly away. Smart, because no one wants to be the one who brings down the whole house. Illness changes the rhythm of the inn. Food is served in silence. Cups are wiped between uses, if not cleaned, then at least wiped with something not already soiled. The fire burns hotter, fueled with bitter-smelling herbs. Blankets are rotated or just burned. The apprentice pours a basin of water with crushed mint and lavender in it. A few guests take turns rinsing their hands, their faces, their guilt. And then, like a miracle, someone laughs. A strong, dry laugh from an old man near the wall. It's the same every year, he says, raising his cup. One sneeze, and suddenly I'm cursed. The innkeeper grins. She pulls out a bottle of something strong and clear and pours a finger's worth into his drink. That's for not sneezing on my pillows. Laughter ripples through the room. Even the sick ones smile. For a moment, the inn feels less like a plague pit and more like a home. A very loud, very damp, very contagious home. You lean back, sip your own drink, and reflect. The innkeeper isn't a doctor. She has no potions, no training. Just instincts, herbs, and a sharp eye for who's faking. But somehow, that's enough. Because in a world without antibiotics or soap, survival comes down to this: don't share cups. Don't trust a man who coughs after smiling. And above all, listen to the woman with the ladle. The door slams open just after sunset, kicked wide by someone wearing too many feathers and far too much perfume. A hush falls because royalty has arrived. Not actual royalty, of course. Real kings don't barge into roadside inns smelling like goat wine and disappointment. But this man, he carries himself like he owns the empire, or at least
wants everyone to believe it. For the next 24 hours, he's followed by 3 servants, 4 bags, 1 goat decorated in gold ribbon, and a traveling trunk so absurdly large it takes 2 grunting porters to drag it inside. The innkeeper's expression doesn't change. She's seen worse. He claps his hands. Good people. A room, a bath, and meat. None of that stew water you people drink. Also, my goat is not to be touched. The goat immediately eats a piece of someone's boot. You watch the innkeeper approach like a quiet storm. She does not bow. She does not curtsy. She does not even pretend to smile. She simply wipes her hands on her apron, raises 1 eyebrow, and says, "That'll be 4 coins per night, 5 if the goat's sleeping indoors." He blinks. "Do you know who I am?" She points at the goat, the one who'll owe me for a boot, apparently. A few guests chuckle. The noble stiffens. Because in ancient inns no one cares who you were outside. You could be a prince, a prophet, a playwright, or the guy who once owned half of Crete. Once you're through that door, you sleep on straw like everyone else. Historians still debate whether traveling nobles were accommodated differently at rural inns. In major cities, yes. In dusty towns with 1 bath and a suspiciously wobbly outhouse, not a chance. You got what was left, and if you complained too loudly, you might get less. The noble snaps his fingers. One of his servants begins unfolding a sheet of purple cloth onto a bench. Another sprinkles rose water on it. A third starts combing the goat's mane. The innkeeper watches. She doesn't stop them. She just moves the pot slightly closer to the noble's bench and adds extra garlic to the stew. You get the feeling this is a tactical choice. Royal guests, real or imagined, were every innkeeper's worst nightmare. They demanded more paid late, or not at all flirted recklessly with staff, and assumed any trouble was someone else's fault. But you couldn't throw them out, at least not right away, because if they were actually important, the backlash could be fatal. So you made them comfortable, publicly, and quietly gave them the worst bed, the leakiest roof, and the stool with 3 legs instead of 4. The noble glances around the room with a look of horror. Is this everyone? The innkeeper nods. It's festival season. He wrinkles his nose. They smell. A man near the hearth raises his cup. So do you. Another laugh. Tension loosens, but not entirely. Because royal guests often come with baggage, not just literal, but emotional. You've heard of inns burned down because a noble didn't like the way his bread was sliced, or the case of the lady who declared the stew too common and then tried to arrest the cook. Spoiler, the cook left. The innkeeper did not. In this inn, the noble's demands multiply by the hour. He wants wine. The inn has ale. He wants bath water. The inn has a bucket. He wants silence. The goat sneezes, and still the innkeeper serves his bowl with a nod. She even lights a second candle for his table. It's dusty and bent, but it's technically extra. She's playing the long game, because sooner or later the noble will leave or be escorted out. And when he does, he'll forget her name, her face, and this entire town. But she will remember everything. The night wears on. Guests drink. Dice roll. The goat knocks over a bench. The noble snores into his sleeve. And just when things seem to settle, one of his servants stumbles into the kitchen and tries to steal bread. The innkeeper catches him with a wooden spoon to the ribs. No shouting. No drama. Just a flat, "You steal again. I break your nose." He nods. Slowly. Leaves. She lets it go. Why? Because punishing the servant would embarrass the noble. And if there's one thing more dangerous than a hungry thief, it's a humiliated aristocrat. You sip your drink and wonder how many nobles she's outlasted. How many egos she scraped off her floor with a mop and a prayer. The answer probably is all of them. Because there's only one true queen in this place, and she wears an apron, not a crown. You're jolted awake by something small and hairy landing on your face. You flail instinctively, knocking over your cup and yelling something deeply unheroic. A ripple of groans spreads across the room as other guests stir. Someone throws a blanket. Someone else mutters a curse. The innkeeper doesn't even look up from the stew pot. She's seen this before. Because the thing that landed on your face, it's not a hallucination. It's a monkey. A monkey with one earring a piece of cheese and absolutely no respect for personal boundaries. You look around in confusion. The monkey is now perching on a beam, dangling a spoon. Someone applauds. Another traveler mutters, "Not again." You get the feeling this happens more often than it should. Welcome to the other layer of innkeeping, survival, pets, pests, and all the freeloaders in between. The line between a guest's beloved companion and public nuisance was always thin in roadside inns. Some brought dogs to guard their carts. Some brought cats for warmth or for pest control, depending on how generous you want to be with the word control. And some brought things they really shouldn't have. You remember the old man who claimed his weasel could predict the weather, or the woman whose parrot repeated every insult it ever heard in 3 languages and half a dialect, or the merchant who once tried to share a mattress with a python and woke up less of a merchant. Historians still debate how common exotic animals were in ancient inns. Most agree that while the average traveler stuck to donkeys and dogs, some wealthier or weirder guests traveled with animals as status symbols or spiritual companions. The result, a menagerie of chaos. And it wasn't just pets. It was pests, fleas, lice, rats the size of cats, cats the size of disappointment, spiders in boots, worms in bread, guests in denial about all of it. The innkeeper grabs a broom and casually swats at the beam. The monkey jumps, does a flip, and lands on a table, startling a merchant who spills his lentils. The innkeeper doesn't apologize. She just says, "Keep your beasts leashed." The merchant shrugs. He's free-spirited. He's also a thief. She replies, holding up someone's coin pouch the monkey just dropped. A collective groan goes up. The monkey gives a sheepish squeak and scurries back to its owner. And this is the real problem with inn animals. They don't follow the rules. People barely do. But animals, they chew things. They steal things.
They relieve themselves wherever the spirit moves them, and they're always, always more beloved than they deserve to be. There's a chicken wandering the common room right now. No one remembers who brought it. It just exists. Occasionally lays an egg, sometimes sleeps in the hearth. One guest claims it talks to him. No one argues. And then there's the goat, still here, still ribboned, still very much asleep in the corner, snoring like a drowned tuba. The innkeeper throws a blanket over it, not out of affection, but to discourage further floor damage. You watch as she starts inspecting the bedding, lifting corners, sniffing hay occasionally, shaking out a blanket, and muttering curses about fleas. At one spot she pauses, squints, and mutters, "No, that's a walnut." She pockets it. Guests are responsible for their animals, technically. But in practice, everything ends up being the innkeeper's job. You once saw her coax a spider out of a wine jug with honey. Another time, she drowned a nest of fleas with garlic water and spite. Her tools, a broom, a belt, and a voice that could frighten most species into submission. A guest near you starts scratching furiously. The innkeeper notices, tosses him a pouch. "Lavender and lye," she says. He sniffs it. "For what? Pour it in your boots and pray." He nods and does as told. That's trust. Or fear. Or both. And then, because of course, someone pulls out a cage. Inside, a snake, a big one, red-striped, coiled like a question mark, made of muscle and bad decisions. The guest holding it grins. He's tame. Just wants warmth. The innkeeper stares at him. She doesn't blink, she doesn't raise her voice, she just says, "One bite and it's dinner." The snake is returned to its cage. You breathe. Because this is the strange truth about inns. The human chaos is loud but predictable. The animal chaos, it's weirdly personal. People will fight you for insulting their mother. They'll kill you for threatening their dog. You remember a bard who once tried to sneak a fox into the kitchen to test its instincts. The fox ate 3 eggs, bit the apprentice, and escaped with the guest's shoe. The bard left barefoot and bleeding. The fox is still occasionally seen near the stables. Some say it pays rent in rabbits. The innkeeper finishes her round. No new bites, no new droppings. Only one half-eaten wig. Don't ask. That's a good night. She looks at the monkey now, asleep in its owner's arms. She sighs, loudly. Then she sets a bowl of water near the hearth, tosses a piece of stale bread toward the chicken, and sprinkles what looks like ash into the corners of the room. It's not magic. It's pest deterrent. Maybe. She doesn't explain. She doesn't need to. Because whether it's a flea, a parrot, a ferret in someone's hood, or the ghost of a badger from 2 festivals ago, she's ready. She has to be. Because tomorrow, someone might arrive with a camel. And if they do, she'll just get a bigger broom.
If there's one thing more dangerous than a full room, it's a full town. And right now, every room in this inn is full. Every hallway, every bit of floor that could possibly support a sleeping body. Someone's using the corner shelf as a pillow. A pair of merchants are playing cards on the back of a pig cart parked inside the courtyard. The pig, also asleep, it has no say in this, because today is festival day, and festival day means complete chaos. The early morning starts with singing, not the pleasant kind, more like off-key chanting mixed with celebratory yelling and the occasional cymbal crash. A child runs in covered in flour. A man in ceremonial robes tries to pay with a loaf of bread shaped like a duck. Someone drops a tambourine into the soup pot. The innkeeper has not blinked in 3 hours because she knows what's coming. Holidays, especially. Religious festivals or harvest rites brought in floods of humanity, all of it loud, messy, and absolutely convinced they deserve free things. The roads are jammed with travelers. The temples overflow. And every last soul who can't find lodging tries their luck here. Historians agree that festivals were the lifeblood of local economies and the slow wheezing death of local patience. For inns, it was like trying to serve soup from a barrel with holes in it. The more you try to contain it, the more it leaks. By midday, the common room is shoulder to shoulder. The noise is biblical. There's a bard attempting to juggle eggs, a goat bleating in rhythm, with a lute and a heavily perfumed man, claiming he's selling festival-enhancing herbs. No one's sure if he means spices or something more exciting. The innkeeper confiscates the pouch just in case. Someone starts dancing on a table. Then the table collapses. The room cheers. The apprentice weeps. You help pick up the pieces. Because during festival days, everything is amplified. The mess, the music, the moods. Every grudge is louder. Every flirtation is more dramatic. Every request becomes a demand. And the innkeeper, she doesn't panic. She adjusts. She reduces the stew servings by half, doubles the bread salt, quietly waters down the wine, and refills the jugs with confidence and a smirk. She starts charging for spoons. She triples the fee for late arrivals and posts a no screaming inside unless you're on fire sign above the door. It doesn't help, but it makes her feel better. You watch as a traveling merchant tries to bring his cart through the side door just for a moment. He's met with a pitchfork, not pointed, just presented. He backs out without argument. Another guest is caught trying to sell festival tokens made from old coins and bad glue. The innkeeper simply tosses him out. No explanation, no threat, just gone. Because by now, everyone knows this is her inn, her rules, her madness, her kingdom. You help the apprentice haul buckets of water, one for washing, one for drinking, and one just in case. He won't explain what that one's for. You don't ask. A visiting noblewoman arrives and demands a private room. The innkeeper gestures to the roof. She storms off. Another guest asks if they can burn incense for the gods in the hallway. She agrees, then hands them a broken clay bowl and a damp wick. The gods will understand. And just when it seems like the tide might turn, a boy bursts in yelling, "The parade is coming," which means everyone will leave. For about 15 minutes, you exhale with hope. The inn empties. People grab cloaks, bread flutes, and flags. Even the monkey from last night vanishes. The room grows quiet. The innkeeper sags into a chair. First time she's sat all day. You sit across from her, sipping watered ale. The silence is magical, almost holy. Then she mutters, "We have 10 minutes." You blink, until the first guest bursts back in. "I forgot my hat," and the spell breaks, because no one stays gone for long. They'll come back sunburnt, drunk, weeping, newly engaged, or halfway in a fist fight with a parade goat. And when they do, she'll be ready. She stands, picks up a ladle in one hand, a list of unpaid debts in the other. The door swings open again. The crowd returns, louder than before, hungrier, hotter, slightly stickier. And somehow she smiles, because chaos means business, and business means survival. Even if the wine tastes like feet and someone's dancing in the pantry again. The parade's chaos hasn't even cooled, and already the inn feels heavier, like the walls themselves are trying to hold their breath. The guests are back crammed tighter than a wine barrel on tax day. Some are bleeding, some are crying. One is inexplicably singing an ode to his own elbow. And the innkeeper, she's in the back room staring at her ledger. Not the guest list, no one keeps a real one. This is the money book, or rather, the where did it all go book. Because innkeeping, for all its noise and stew, is a business, and business right now is giving her a headache. She runs a finger down the latest entries, muttering under her breath. 3 rooms unpaid, 2 mugs shattered, 1 stolen chicken. Again. The apprentice pokes his head in holding a broken bench leg and a bouquet of herbs. The bard wants to pay in poetry again. She doesn't even look up. Tell him to rhyme it with rent, or go sleep in the dung cart. He vanishes. You peek at the ledger over her shoulder. It's a war zone. Numbers scratched out, re-added, rewritten sideways. A crude drawing of a goat in the margin is labeled "Owes me shoes." Ancient innkeeping wasn't just about soup and survival. It was about math. Ugly, fast, instinctual math. Because for every coin you took, in 5 things got stolen, broken, or eaten by something that probably shouldn't eat metal. And guests were experts at not paying. Some skipped out before dawn, some faked injury or illness to gain sympathy and discounts. Some claimed they'd already paid to someone else. One man famously paid the innkeeper with a smile and a song, then ran into the night barefoot, singing his own name. And when she finally caught him a month later, he claimed he was possessed. The ledger doesn't lie, though, and right now it's full of holes. She slams it shut, because in a place like this, bookkeeping is emotional damage. Historians suggest that most ancient inns operated on thin margins and sheer force of personality. Some kept tallies with pebbles or tokens. Others just remembered who paid who, owed who, died, and who deserved stew anyway. This inn, it's somewhere in the middle. She walks into the kitchen, grabs a handful of dried beans, and drops them into a row of small pots behind the bar. Credit tracking, she explains. Each pot represents a guest. Each bean means something owed. You count 12 pots. You stop counting the beans. Then she opens a second ledger. This one's worse, smaller, greasier, with pages stained by what looks like chicken blood and regret. This is the supply book. Inventory. Bread, salt, clean linens crossed out, candles, buckets, spoons, underlined 3 times. Someone stole a spoon yesterday. Who steals a spoon? You ask. She points at the noble's goat. Ask him. You don't. The apprentice returns. The pilgrim from room 3 says he'll pay after his vision quest. She replies, without blinking, put a beetle in his boot. You stare. It won't kill him. Just teach him to respect deadlines. You're beginning to understand her financial philosophy. Passive-aggressive chaos. That's how she survives the ledger madness. Because here's the truth. Inns don't go broke from famine or plague. They go broke from leaks. Not just water, but money. Broken chairs, extra firewood, that one guest who drank a whole jug of ale and paid with a story about his childhood trauma. And staff need paying too. The apprentice gets bread stew, a place by the fire, and not getting kicked privileges. Occasionally, a bonus, a pair of old shoes, a cloak, a warning about which guests snore the loudest. The cook, she left last week. The innkeeper does everything now. You wonder if anyone pays her. And then there are taxes. She pulls out a scroll half unrolled, covered in stamps and notes and illegible demands. Local officials want their cut. Temple tithes, guild fees, seasonal fines for noise pollution. She once got fined for unruly shadows, whatever that meant. She sighs. Then she tears the scroll in half. Business as usual. But she keeps the ledger, because no matter how many guests cheat or goats eat her math tools, she still tracks every bean bowl and bedbug. That's how she stays in charge. And it's not just pride, it's survival. Because if she ever loses track of debts, supplies people, this whole fragile mess collapses. And when that happens, no stew, no roof, no soft place for weary feet. She returns to the common room ledger in hand. She looks at each guest in turn. Her eyes say, I know what you owe. I know what you broke. I know where you sleep. Someone clears their throat. About that room payment. She raises one finger. He goes silent. The goat sneezes. She sighs, flips open the book again, and mutters, another bean. It starts small. A whisper at the bread stall. A wink from the jug seller across the street. A subtle shift in how the traveling spice merchant glares at the front door of the inn. By the time the apprentice returns from the well with a black eye and a handful of very specific insults, the innkeeper already knows sabotage. She mutters a phrase that sounds suspiciously like, "Not this again," and reaches beneath the counter for a long, flat stick with nails hammered through one end. Not a weapon, a pointer, used for maps, beams, and if necessary, heads. Because the truth is, running an inn isn't just about food and fire. It's about territory. And this territory, it's under siege. From the other inn across the square, you hadn't noticed it before. It looks harmless enough. Clean sign, polished windows, a man in 2 clean robes standing out front with a jug of something suspiciously aromatic. But that's the trap. They're offering free drinks for new guests. You glance at the innkeeper. Her nostrils flare. That's how you know it's serious. Because nothing in the world is free, especially not during festival season. You hear the whispers now. The other inn has pillows with feathers. They let you bathe in actual water. Their stew tastes like food. Lies. All of it. But lies are dangerous when they're said with enough sugar and volume. And this is classic inn warfare. Historians rarely document the quiet, simmering battles between rival inns. But if you talk to enough old innkeepers, you'll hear the stories about sabotage, seduction, and soap that mysteriously went missing right before a royal visit. Coincidence? Never. Your innkeeper knows this game. She's played it before, and she's ready. She starts with defensive measures. More salt in the stew makes guests drink more ale. She lights the hearth extra early. Cozy always wins. She places 3 particularly loud musicians near the entrance volume. Warfare. Then she moves to counterattack. The apprentice is dispatched with a free sample tray of hard bread and an eyebrow-raising tale about a rat infestation next door. It's not even a lie. Probably. Within an hour, 2 guests return. Just to compare, they say. They stay. Someone else comes in and mutters, "The other place charged me for spoons." The innkeeper simply gestures to her own pile of spoons, slightly bent, possibly cursed, but free. Round 1, won. But it doesn't stop. By sunset, the rival inn sends a singer, a bard, with teeth too white and a smile too wide. He plays outside your door, singing songs about clean sheets and goat-free dining. His lute is annoyingly well-tuned. The guests swoon. The innkeeper watches unimpressed. She mutters, "He's playing in E minor." Coward. Then she snaps her fingers. From the back emerges a woman with a tambourine, half a drum, and a voice like a thunderstorm with a hangover. The locals call her Maple. No one knows why. She doesn't stop singing until the bard is gone. Round 2, scorched earth. But sabotage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's sneaky. You discover a guest loitering in the hallway. Claims he's just admiring the beams. He's wearing a pin from the other inn. The apprentice follows him to the pantry where he's caught trying to swap out the good salt for powdered chalk. He is escorted out by his ears. The innkeeper adds another bean to a jar labeled spies. And then it escalates. Late that night, someone tosses a stink bundle through the back window, wrapped in goat hair, drenched in fermented cabbage water. It lands in the soup pot. The innkeeper doesn't scream. She simply fishes it out, sniffs, and mutters, "They're getting desperate." She dumps the pot, starts another, and adds extra garlic, just to spite them. Because here's the truth. In rivalry isn't about stealing guests. It's about reputation, about whose hearth is warmest, whose bed's least infested, and whose stew doesn't taste like tax form. Your innkeeper knows that. So she fights not with fists, but with consistency. She knows every guest by face, by order, by suspicious foot fungus. She lets the bard stay when he confesses he's broke, but makes him sweep in return. She gives the mother with 2 screaming toddlers an extra slice of bread and doesn't roll her eyes once. She sees everything. She remembers everything. And when the tax collector stops by the next day and quietly mentions that the other place had a suspicious lack of guest records, she hands him a cup of tea and a scroll. Every name she says, even the goat. The other inn gets a warning. Round 3, fatal blow. You sit by the fire as the guests settle in. Someone's playing soft music. Someone else is snoring. A child laughs in their sleep. The innkeeper leans against the wall, sipping tea, eyes sharp. "You win?" you ask. She shrugs. "There's always another one." You glance toward the rival inn. Their sign is crooked now, their front lanterns out. A small victory. But tomorrow they'll try something new, and she'll be ready. Because this is her house, and no one out-schemes the woman who tracks spoons like gold. Some inns have libraries. This one has a cellar. You wouldn't know it's there, just by looking. The door blends into the wall, like a wart someone politely ignores. Most guests never even notice it. But if you stay long enough, if you watch the innkeeper closely, you'll see the signs, the way she disappears. Mid-shift, the heavy tray that vanishes too quickly, the creak of a stair that's not on the main floor, because beneath the stew and straw and chaos of upstairs lies something older, colder, and far more interesting. Tonight the innkeeper lights a second lantern and slips behind the curtain near the pantry. She nods to you. "You coming?" "Of course you're coming." She opens the door, and you descend into what should not exist. Stone steps worn slick by centuries. A chill in the air that smells like damp earth, old wine, and decisions people regret but never admit to. The cellar is large, too large for a building this size. It's the kind of space that makes you ask questions with your eyes, but not your mouth. Because this place, this is where the real innkeeping happens. At the base of the stairs is a room full of secrets. Barrels, yes. Wine, of course. But also boxes marked in chalk with names and dates. Shelves of forgotten goods, a prosthetic leg, 3 wigs, a sword hilt, and a bag of teeth labeled Jasper. A locked cabinet emits the faint scent of regret and lavender. There's a cot in the corner, a small desk, a chest with 3 locks. This is more than storage. This is neutral ground. Down here, deals are struck, meetings are held, favors are stored like dried apples, waiting for the right season to ripen. You sit watching the innkeeper pour 2 cups of something dark and vaguely flammable. She hands you one. No toast, no words, just the quiet understanding. What happens here stays here. Historians argue whether ancient inns doubled as underground networks, safe houses, trading posts, intelligence stops. The answer, if this cellar is any proof, is yes, because while upstairs is for survival, downstairs is for strategy. She pulls out a folded cloth map, stained and creased, points to a symbol near the border. He stopped by last week, didn't eat, asked too many questions, wore boots too clean. You nod. You don't know who he is, but you know what he was: a scout, a spy, or a traveler, pretending not to be both. The innkeeper has a drawer for these things, a list, coded, of course. She opens another drawer, this one lined with messages, some carved into wood chips, some written in inks made from herbs and soot. One message is burned into the corner of a breadboard. It says simply, "Don't trust the girl with the flute. You don't ask." She tucks a pouch into her apron. For tomorrow. What's in it? Salt, rope, a key, and 2 very convincing lies. This is the cellar's magic. It holds everything the upstairs cannot. Need a bribe. There's a jar for that. Need to disappear. Someone quietly. There's a rote under the wine rack. Need to keep 3 rival guests from noticing they're all sleeping with the same widow. There's a chart on the back wall detailing shift rotations and breakfast seating. The innkeeper finishes her drink and lights a second lantern. Time to check the stash. You follow her into the back cellar, darker, colder, and distinctly more cursed. Here lie the real valuables, not gold information. A scroll in a lead tube, a bag of foreign coins, a medallion that no one wears openly anymore, a ledger, not for guests, for debts, names etched deep. Not everyone on this list owes money. Some owe favors, others owe blood. You shiver slightly and ask, "Ever collect?" She doesn't smile. "When I have to." There's a final corner of the cellar, less used, dusty, full of crates, sealed so tightly they might as well be coffins. You ask, what's in them? Things that don't like the sun. You don't ask again. Because here's the truth. The innkeeper isn't just keeping beds and stew in order. She's keeping secrets. She's keeping balance. She's keeping the wolves outside long enough for the sheep to rest. And when the wolves come downstairs, she meets them here with firelight fermented tea and a lockbox full of leverage. She douses the lantern and begins climbing back up. You follow in silence. When the door closes behind you, the upstairs noise hits like thunder, laughter, clanking bowls, someone yelling about dice. You blink. No one noticed you were gone. And that's the point, because above ground, the inn is warmth and chaos and noise. But below, Below is where the story really happens. The fire's burned low again. Outside, the moon hangs swollen and silent over the road, watching, like everything else that's passed through this inn and didn't speak. Inside, the last guest finally slumps forward into their cup, snoring with the rhythmic sincerity of someone who truly earned their sleep. You sit back against the beam, tired to your bones. It's been, what, days, weeks, a lifetime maybe, since you first arrived here with sore feet and low expectations. And yet, here you still are. The innkeeper wipes down the counter with the kind of slow, exhausted grace that only comes from surviving everything: drunks, nobles, taxes, goats, ghosts, and the occasional flaming spoon incident. Her apron is stained, her eyes are bloodshot, and her ledger is still open. She hasn't smiled all day. She rarely does. But somehow it's comforting, because what you've come to realize more than anything is that this place survives not by accident, but by sheer stubborn will. And her will, it's made of iron vinegar and extremely sharp ladle edges. She passes you a crust of bread, not warm, not soft, but honest. It tastes like survival. You nod. She nods back. No words are needed. Around you, the inn finally settles into that rare, quiet moment when everyone is sleeping or pretending to, and even the walls seem to exhale. There's a whisper in the beams, a creak in the floor, and the lingering scent of ash and overcooked barley. This place, it's tired too, and yet it lives. The door is barred. The stew is still simmering thinner than ever, but still, someone's cloak is folded neatly on a bench. A wooden cup sits beside a pile of coins that will never be claimed. The innkeeper lights one final candle and places it by the window. A signal. Not for guests, but for other innkeepers. The ones on the road. The ones still open. The ones who know what it means to keep watch, while others dream. Because they are few, fewer, every season. The world is moving on caravans, travel faster. Temples offer free housing. Some cities even build state lodgings now. Clean, cheap, controlled. But none of those places serve you soup made from memories. None of them ask your name twice just to see if you lie better the second time. None of them offer you a bed and protection without ever saying the word safe. You finish your bread and rise, stretching your aching legs. The innkeeper doesn't stop you, just watches. A flicker in her eyes that might be concern or simply the mental math of whether you paid your tab. You did, probably. You thank her quietly. She nods once. Come back if you live. It's the closest thing to love she'll ever say. You step outside. The air bites. The night yawns. But your chest is warm in a way that stew alone can't explain. Because something about this place stays with you. Not just the smells or the bruises or the monkey that stole your spoon, but the way the door creaked just so. The way the fire spoke like an old friend. The way a stranger's hand steadied you when you stumbled in half dead, half lost, and fully unwelcome everywhere else. And the way, somehow in this mess of mud and smoke and lies, you belonged. You glance back once. The inn glows dimly behind you, still standing, still open, still hers, and still waiting for the next tired soul with a pouch of half-truths and a need for warmth, because there will always be more guests, always more stories, always more stew. And as long as she has beans, bread, and a broom, the innkeeper will be here, keeping watch, keeping secrets, keeping everyone alive. And now as your eyes grow heavy and the firelight fades into ember and breath, let this inn sink into your bones. Let the smell of stew, the scrape of boots on stone, the creak of wooden beams, hold you gently in this fading quiet. You've heard the laughter. You've dodged the fights. You've watched a woman keep a whole world together with one hand on a ladle and the other on a locked drawer. And you survived it. You made it through the noise, the lies, the goat with boundary issues. You walked. The cellar heard the secrets, watched the tricks. You ate the stew, even when you weren't sure what it was. And still you made it. Not every guest does. Some leave with fewer coins. Some leave with fewer illusions. Some leave behind their name and pick a new one on the way out. But all of them leave with something. So do you. Maybe a sliver of wisdom. Maybe just the scent of garlic in your cloak, or maybe just the memory of a place that held chaos like a prayer, where a woman older than the road stood guard against the night, not because it made sense, but because someone had to. So now, rest. You don't need to fight for space. You don't need to lie about your past. Here for this breath, for this heartbeat, you are safe. The stew has cooled. The candle has burned low. The monkey is asleep. And the innkeeper, she's watching the door, just in case.